Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to answer a commonly asked question from non-farmers. What's the difference between this 100-day corn versus 80-day corn you guys talk about? Or with soybeans, you'll say a 1.0 maturity versus a 2.0 maturity. What does that mean?
Well, farmers are going to spread their risk a little bit on their farm by planting some corn that matures a little faster and some that matures a little later. It's no different than what you might do in your garden. If you're raising sweet corn, for example, you may raise 2 or 3 different kinds of sweet corn, so you could start harvesting some early and then some that wouldn't be ready until later to kind of spread your enjoyment out over the season. For farmers, it's about spreading their risk, because if we have a year where we get an early frost, or if we have a year that's excessively cold throughout the summer or something like that, we don't want to have all full season maturity that takes the full growing season before you actually get seed. We want to have some that's a little bit shorter just in case the weather doesn't go our way.
Okay, so for corn, it matures differently than some other crops. What corn needs is heat. And so we calculate heat units throughout the season, and there's a number for what we call growing degree days. The number might be 2,000 or 1,800 or 2,300, whatever it is. So technically that's really what we're shooting for. But in simple terms, back in the old days, we used to talk about it would take X number of days to get the corn mature. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be dry yet, but at least it's mature in the fall. And so that's where the 100 days comes in, or the 80 days, or 120 days, whatever that would happen to be.
Well, and this is going to vary depending on what part of the country you're in too. If you're in North Dakota and way up by the Canadian border, you're probably raising 75 or 80-day corn in a lot of cases. And then if you're way to the southern end of North Dakota, you may be able to raise 90-day corn. And then as you move further south, each state that you move further south, farmers will plant a few days later and a few days later and a few days later. And pretty soon we're talking about...
A few days longer maturity.
Right. And soon we're talking about 120-day maturing corn. Just for fun this year, for our field day and for a demonstration, we planted, for one seed company, we planted about every hybrid they had from 77-day maturity to 113-day maturity. And it was really neat watching those plants grow throughout the season. Now, when they first start off, they all emerged from the ground about at the same time. It took about as much heat to get that seed to germinate and emerge from the ground. But once we got a couple of leaves on the corn, it was very evident the shorter maturing corn, so the 70-day, 80-day, 90-day corn, really started growing fast. And what happens with those early maturing hybrids is they just know they don't have much time to grow, because typically they're grown way to the north where the season is shorter. And so they're in a hurry to try and get to tassel as fast as they can. Where the fuller season corns, they'll grow a little slower. They know they've got lots of time, so they aren't in this huge rush. And what happens for farmers when they have corn that's trying to grow really fast, it's pretty tricky to raise those kind of hybrids, because any stress that comes along can really affect them. Where a more full season maturity hybrid can handle stress a lot better because it's not in this huge rush.
And basically the difference is not from the time the corn is planted to the time it's small, maybe 2-3 leaf stage. The difference is not from tassel to maturity. Where the difference comes in is from when the plant is real small up until tasseling time. That's where you see this big difference in how long it takes to get to tassel. The short day corns versus the long day corns.
And with soybeans, it's a little bit different. Now, Brian said corn matures based on heat that it accumulates. Soybeans look at the day length in our part of the world. Now, there are a couple of different kinds of soybeans. There are soybeans that basically they will do all their vegetative stages first, then they'll start to do the reproductive stages. But in the north where we farm, our season is fairly short. And so the soybeans will actually watch the day length. And as soon as the day length starts to shorten up, then those soybeans start to trigger flowering and the reproductive stages. Even though they may still be very short and have a lot of vegetative growth still to do, they'll start doing those reproductive stages early, because you never know when we're going to get a frost.
Well, once again, there is definitely a difference in maturities, and as farmers, we're constantly trying to figure out, well, what's the right maturity? But guess what? Nobody knows what we're going to have next year for heat or sunlight or rainfall. Nobody knows exactly when we're going to get the crop planted. planted, exactly how long we're going to have to harvest the crop. So we just kind of have to look at history, but it's always a little bit of trial and error. And as farmers, we spread the maturity risk out. So on our farm, we might plant 90-day corn up to 105-day corn, and a lot of farmers will do the same thing. So they've kind of got their bases covered. They're at least not going to lose everything if they happen to have a disaster year.
Well, farmers have to spread their risk out and kind of work on what the average is over the years. But one thing they can always count on over the years is there will be weeds to control. Weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?